welcome to NDC Sydney, Melbourne. Get the right town. Yeah, this is like an American performer goes. I've always loved being in Sydney, and going the wrong town. So yeah. So everyone having a good time? Everyone having a good time? Yeah. Right. Well done. I'll get you going. I work for a company called Free Market. They always, any company I work for gets a logo put big because they allow me to do this in work time and do things like that. So it's quite nice to have a company that allows that. The presentation is the curious incident in your software in the daytime. This is quite a tortuous title. Anyone, any idea why I would call a talk this? Does it ring any bells with anyone? Because there's a book called The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. Have you read this? Aha. I've got 5 copies to give away at the end, so if people want to read it. It's a really good book. Here it is, by Mark Haddon. It's about an autistic kid investigating. Really good. Won loads of awards and stuff. So forgive me for the most tortured title. Because I want to do a talk on incident management, and as soon as I thought incident, I thought of the book, and then I went, yeah, somehow I'll shoehorn a title into the title of the book. So, but there you are. Because you want to have an interesting title for what could be considered a bit of a dull topic, let's be honest. So, what are we going to talk about? I should say, yeah, I'm head of engineering at Free Market FX, so I've just spent about the last couple of years sorting out the incident management plan, writing it up, how it should work, getting the business involved. So an incident is basically anything that stops you having your platform, your software working as expected. That's kind of what it is. It includes things like your customers having problems, or you're just generally, your customers might not know it, but your people inside your company are having a hell of a time trying to use your software and manage it. Or you may be regulated. We're regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority, and soon, hopefully, the Central Bank of Ireland as an EU division. So we've got to fulfill loads of regulation things. You might have healthcare regulation. Does Australia have something like GDPR? Or data privacy? Yeah, so if you go and lose customer data in the UK, you have to go to the Information Commission's office and tell them, by the way, we just lost loads of customer data and what you're doing about it. All that kind of thing has to happen. And equally, in the middle of all this, your customers are disappointed by how your software is working. You get reputational damage. So that's why you're trying to handle these incidents. So, why should you care? Well, I assume you've all tried to make everything redundant. So you've got multiple systems, you might have everything in Kubernetes and containers, and it scales automatically, and it's over multiple data centers or whatever. So it'll all be fine. You've got loads of backups. But something's always going to go wrong. You just know it's going to go wrong. It might be something you've unanticipated in your own software. It might be a support guy going delete start by accident on a table, that kind of thing. We're given too much access. So the most important thing you want to have is a plan, right? A plan for what happens when something unexpected happens. That doesn't mean your plan has every scenario in the world, but it just gives you a playbook to use to cope with this thing. You want somewhere to organize people and everyone to know where it is. And wherever that place is, you probably want the most important people's telephone numbers and stuff, so that no one's going, can someone find me the mobile number of the CFO, Chief Fraud Officer, or things like that, Chief Risk Officer. It'd be really handy if you already knew how you'd talk to your customers and the partners you might work with. So if you work with banks, you might be able to talk to the banks immediately and tell them what's happening. And if you've got that regulation for the data protection, or you're bank regulated or health regulated, you'll want to keep a record of all this crap, because you're going to have to send it to them afterwards, probably, to explain what happened. And why should you care in general? I assume with the Four Eyes thing, where Australia's with the US and UK, everyone's panicking that the Russians are going to cyber attack. Right? They definitely are in the UK. They're a bit worried about that because, you know, we've got a prime minister who's getting into more and more personal trouble. So the way he gets out of that is sending more and more weapons to Ukraine and chatting to the president of Ukraine to try and distract everyone. That doesn't distract Russia, who's going, you little sod. And you're going to go after the Russian oligarchs and all the money in London. So we're on a danger list now of being hacked, quite clearly. So we've got that. And then, anyone remember British Airways giving everyone's credit card details away a few years ago? Like, you know, just about 1/3 of a million customers. A load of them had to actually cancel their credit cards and get them reissued. Imagine how much that costs. Like millions of pounds for the banks just to reissue credit cards to get out of that hole that British Airways never had to pay for directly to the banks who were involved. So you don't want that kind of thing happening to you. You know, that was a supply chain hack, really, because it was a bit of JavaScript that they imported for the Magic Art, and that's what caused the problem. So those are why you're going to want to care about all this. So, but what's an incident? Well, probably someone trying to hack you and try and get data out of your system. Then you've got the pissed off employees, or maybe it's a sales guy who's leaving who goes and lifts all your customer details because they can then take them to the next company. So that may be equally happening. Or it could be just someone who replies to an email and gets phished and actually lets data leave your building and they're internal. When we got the people who are trying to do denial of service. So that's the kind of thing the Russian guys would hit more often, would try and saturate your servers, so take you out of action. And where you've got a serious issue for all your customers, so all your customers are struggling to work, or you've got little bits not working for certain customers, so it might only be little chunks of the system. But all of those could be declared an incident. And you've got to keep an eye on all of those kind of things. Not all of them are technical. That's an important thing. Someone getting drunk and leaving their laptop in a pub, that happens quite a lot. Or hotel lobby, there you are. Or the office building has a water leak and no one can get in it, so you can't get into any of the systems that you had. This has become easier since COVID because everything can be run remotely. So it doesn't matter if you can't get into the office because you weren't in the office for a year, so pretty much everyone's recovered from the idea of not being in the office. So that's a lot easier. But all of those could be declared an incident. So here's some good examples. Did anyone get an email from GitHub this year that said, by the way, we accidentally scanned your private repos and started publishing the URI to them on a public website as part of a data analysis operation? So basically, anyone who used GitHub Pages and a private repo, the URI to that GitHub Pages ended up on a public website that people could look at by accident. So they emailed everyone to go, by the way, these are the repos that were affected. You ought to check whether there's anything in that URI you would care about. And for us, it wasn't because it's just documentation on our API, so it didn't bother us. But yeah, so they managed to leak data, which are quite bad. And did anyone get an email from Atlassian? That was a good one. You know I said about the employee doing delete star, and everyone goes, but no one would do something like that. Right. If you don't know this, Atlassian had a tool which could permanently delete just one customer's workspace, or it could delete an entire server with lots of workspaces on it. Someone ran it accidentally against the server ID using a customer's account ID, which matched the server ID, and they said permanent, and it deleted 400 sites. Right? That's people's Confluence and Jira disappearing, and the only recovery they had was to restore them individually one by one from backups, and it took them 2 weeks to get everyone's Jira and Confluence back. During this time, developer productivity at those companies went up massively. But the project managers weren't impressed. And they had to confess to all this. And you know it's serious when they translate it to 11 different languages on their blog, right? Because that's how many countries got affected in that outage. So these things are kind of quite real. So the problem is, this is the only funny bit, as you know, is you could be these guys just hanging around, and suddenly there's an incident, and what you don't want to do is be like this. Right, that's what you don't want to be doing, screaming into the void. Why, what are we going to do? Obviously, this might end up on YouTube, so for any video editor, there's a bit that they can slot in instead of the minions, which is obviously copyright and shouldn't be on YouTube. Right, that's about the right amount of time. So the whole point is, that's why I said at the very start of this, you need a plan. And it's not just a pretty PDF, right? A plan is something you rehearse and actually go through regularly with the rest of the company. So the really important bit to get an understanding in your company is that, stop jiggling, is that it's not a technical thing. It's a whole company thing, incidents like this. So you want to rehearse it. And there's a phrase in the IT industry, how many have heard this? You don't have a backup until you've restored from it. Has anyone heard that before? Yeah. Has anyone not heard it and why that's a relevant thing? I only say this because I gave this talk in London, and at the end, 3 people said, I don't understand what you mean by you haven't got a backup until you've restored it. And in the old days, you had things like backup tapes, and you could restore from a backup tape. And one of the use cases for that was maybe your server caught fire or got damaged and everything, and then you had to get a new server with a new tape drive and restore from that tape. Half the time, the tape wouldn't actually restore because the tape drive, the heads had moved out of alignment, and only that drive in that server could ever have read the tape back. So unless you restore it on a different box, you never knew it was going to work. And then there's the other people who put the tape in, went restore, and they found they hadn't actually backed anything up anyway, because they'd misconfigured their backup tool. So that's what it means. So equally, for incidents, unless you've rehearsed an incident and practiced how it works, you probably haven't got a workable plan, because the first time you run your plan, you'll find loads of bits that don't work, and you'll hone it. And you may have brought that plan from another company, but it just doesn't work in your new company, because people work differently and departments work differently. And it's getting that entire process where the whole of the business get involved. If you're lucky, or unlucky, depends on your view, you'll have a few incidents and you'll practice them by having an incident. And you'll sort out your plan at that point. And the things you rehearse are the rehearsals for the incidents you haven't had. And then there's the question, is it an incident? Well, the important bit is allow anyone to report an incident. So anyone in the company should feel okay about saying, hey, something's gone wrong. That's equally, I got emails, I think it's dodgy, but I still clicked on the link because it said I was going to get a free coffee, right? And then admit, shit, I shouldn't have done that. I'm not sure what happened with that email. So don't punish people for doing stuff like that. Allow them to learn from it and things like that. And it's better to have these false alarms. And just because someone reports an incident doesn't make it an incident. That's the important thing. They think it might be a serious issue. It turns out it's not really a serious issue, and you can downgrade it. So I'd rather have people be eager to tell me there's problems with our systems, and then we go, actually, we know what it is, and it's not going to be a real problem, than have them worried that they shouldn't be bothering us. And make it as easy to do as possible. So how do you report an incident at Free Market? We built it into Slack. So Slack is where we report an incident, handle all the chat about the incident, handle the calls, handle the whole lot. People's mobile phones are on the user profiles in Slack. So we have one tool that you can use to handle incidents. And we've got, finally, took nearly 12 months, they actually have email templates to send to customers. Emails templates for when an incident happens, an update to an incident before we've actually fixed it, and then a concluding email template for we fixed it now, blah, blah, blah. At least we've got those ready to go so that everyone understands how they should be used. And more importantly, all the developers know that they're not meant to use them. Only marketing and sales should ever send an email out, and then let it be on their head what they put in it, right? Don't force the tech team to be talking to customers, because I think it's a really bad idea. The tech team can fix incidents that are technical, and that's what they should be focusing on and getting things done. By the way, it can be really tricky if you've got customers who are using your API and they've got a tech contact in that company and they're trying to find out why the API isn't working. So you've got to be really careful not to tell too much while the incident's happening so that you're not leaking it out. So here's an example that we have. So as I said, we use Slack. The interesting thing about this is commercial guy said, I've kind of mocked up how we could report an incident. So one of the sales guys said, I've done this in this channel so you can have a look at how it works. And I spent about 10 minutes, because I'm an idiot, looking for the add-in he must have used in Slack to report an incident. And the answer is, he didn't use an add-in. Slack has something called workflows that are really easy to use, where it just puts a little form, you type in the data, you hit buttons, and it can post to any channel in the system, collate the data, do all sorts of things, pick lists. So we have, in our general channel that everyone's in, you hit the plus button, there's now report an incident as an option. You click on that, and it shows a little form. So we have platform slow, we think there's a data loss, we think we're being hacked, all sorts of different categories. All this can be done by anyone in the company. It's really easy to write a workflow. So it's no code, low code sort of kind of solution. No add-ins, no worries about check-ins to Git or testing and all that kind of integration stuff. And they just write all this and they hit submit. And when they hit submit, in the general channel it says, Liam has just reported an incident, and go off to the incident management channel. And then in the incident management channel, it dumps the data that they've typed in. And it puts that in an incident management channel, which everyone's directed to go to if they're interested in heading off. It also goes into a tech channel and into a senior management channel. So there's like dump, 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 pushes it into 3 channels, and then it does a direct message back to the user who reported it saying, unbelievably, please can you email these details to this email address, because Slack has no email integration because it believes email is an old technology and Slack has superseded it, so you're not allowed to send an email from Slack. Right, which is one of the most bizarre things ever, but there you are. So you can put in an email address, which if you click on, opens your email client, and then they can just type in it and send an email out to the people who only handle emails. And this means that everyone is really easy. It's really easy for anyone in the company to report an incident, and they are. So we normally get about 1 a week, emails, the platform's being slow, there's duplicate payments to a bank or something like that, or a bank isn't paying out correctly, and the customer has complained. And then the tech team can discuss it in their own channel, the management can discuss it in their own channel, and the company can chat together. And that's the important bit, to get everyone together. So the really important bit about this is you want a central place where everything gets discussed, because this will be the timeline you need to send to the regulator. And the nice thing about any chat app, Teams, Slack, whatever it is you use, Google something, don't know what the Google equivalent is, because I haven't used it, you'll have a timeline, so you'll know who was talking, what they said. We actually put in, please use Slack calls in Slack, not huddles, because if you use a call in Slack, you know who joined the call, who was in the call, and all that kind of thing. Huddles don't actually record who was talking in them, because they're different in Slack, so we've pushed everyone to that kind of thing. And that allows us to just allow us to do that auditing at the end of who was involved in the whole thing. That gets the whole company in there to have a chat. However, I would advise you to keep people separate. So, key one, I would keep the technical people who are working on an incident in their own area. They could discuss what the technical implications are of what's happened. So if there's problems with the database, there's problems with the website, they can have a chat about it, they can do possible solutions. If you don't separate the technical people, basically, if you were in the office, so I've actually run incidents where people were physically in offices, you know, because there wasn't COVID and no one had learned to work from home properly. And basically, there was virtually people behind developers going, is it fixed yet? Is it fixed yet? From all the different departments. And that's the last thing you need as a developer, is someone poking you every minute of what's happening, how's it being fixed. So instead, you nominate an engineering contact. So in that Slack channel, if it is an incident, we'll put in, here's the person who's going to deal with it from a technical point of view, here's the person who's dealing with it from a business point of view. If you need an update, talk to those people. Those are the people who are going to give you updates. So I would end up mostly as the engineering contact, because I've become head of engineering and my coding skills are so why would you want me near the code in an emergency? Don't do that. However, I can talk to the developers and feed back to the rest of the company and keep the rest of the company at bay, so the developers can focus on that. Equally, business contacts can be talking to the banks. So they're talking to JP Morgan or Lloyds or whoever to just chat to them about what's happening with the services that they're providing that maybe aren't available at the time. And that just allows it all to be kept separate. And then outside the organization, I think I said, whatever you do, let commercial and marketing send the emails. Don't worry about it as a technical person, developer. Just say, here's what you could tell them. It's up to you what you want to put in the email. Right? Just let them deal with it at the time. And you'll feel a lot happier because they know it's their job. And also, it's what they do all the time is to try and, not lie, but finesse, polish, adjust the reality of the world to make it look okay. And they also will have an eye on legal implications of saying something in an email that you wouldn't have necessarily. If you've got a status page, which we still don't have at Free Market, it would be nice if we did have one, a status.wearefreemarket.com, update that as soon as possible with known phrases. Just like the email and social, you'd have known kind of wording for it. And if it's long running, start to do technical advisories where you're kind of going, yeah, it's been going for an hour, we have this issue, and a quick summary of the technical reason why you're still having that issue. And then for the end of the incident, a nice template that says, hey, we've resolved it. If you have any more issues, talk to these people and give them some contacts, which are normally in the commercial department. And then afterwards, I would really advise that incident report that's going to go to the regulators, you probably do a kind of cut down versions as well that would go to your customers. So they might not get all the gory details, but it's really nice to go out to customers and say, this is exactly what happened, here's the reasons it's happened, here's how we fixed it, here's how we fixed it immediately, here's how we're fixing it long term, here's how we think we'll make sure we'll never do this again. If it's something that you want to not do again, you could stop. And even customers who weren't affected, it's really nice to go, by the way, you weren't affected, but you may hear that we had this issue. We've now fixed it. It won't happen again, and it didn't affect anything of your data or your systems because you weren't affected. So it's a really cool thing to be able to do, and it's so much easier when you have that timeline in a kind of chat application. So, an example of how it works. I'm not going to do the current company because we haven't had anything that serious at that level. But I did used to work for a company called Huddle. The kind of short version of what Huddle did was secure document collaboration. I kind of said my lift pitch would be SharePoint that works, because it was easier to use than SharePoint at the time. It still is easier to use than SharePoint, but not for long, I suspect, because they've been taken over 2 or 3 times since I've left, and most of the technical staff have left, including 3 of them who are now working for me. So I have poached staff, because I knew them, and I left long enough ago that I'm allowed to poach them without breaking any rules. But the BBC used to use Huddle to store documentation, store scripts and things like that. So did accountancy firms like KPMG. So a BBC journalist logged in, and when they logged in, they didn't see BBC folders, they saw KPMG Francis folders system. And it's a BBC journalist, so what he did, and he was also a technical reporter, what he did was screen grab it all fuzzy it out, and then give us 6 hours to work out what the hell had happened before he released it onto the website. Now, there were people at Huddle who said, he's really mean. And you're going, he's a journalist. You're lucky you got 6 hours, right? He could have just put that straight out. You know, there's a flaw in Huddle. So what they found, or what we found, immediately, obviously, incident scrambled. Chief architect, Ian Cooper, who you may have heard of because he does talks and workshops at NDC, was on it like a ton of bricks. Every developer's like, whoom, everyone working on this. Looks like we've got an identity issue, so the team who deals with identity are the ones who have to really focus on it. One of the mid-level developers, George, was actually in there like a shot. Within an hour, he'd worked out what it was. It was a singleton, shared state between different users on the same box. You had to come in within 20 milliseconds of someone else, and you nick their access token by accident. So it's a real nasty one. And the problem was, 2 people successfully log in, they both get the same access token, they both end up seeing the same shit. Unlucky. So that was found within an hour. Within another hour, it was fixed and released, so that was removed, and that wasn't a singleton. So that's your short-term fix. The medium fix was, whoomp, every team went through every code library looking for singletons, and could they possibly cause the same issue, and went through every singleton in the entire code base over the next 2 or 3 days, removing the singletons that should never have been existed. And then the long-term fix was discussions of, well, we could put a unique code in the browser that when it comes back, 2 people coming back wouldn't have got the same auth code anyway in the same situation. For US people, this isn't funny, but in the UK, it's the use of something called a nonce, which I can never cope with in security terms because it has another meaning in the UK. But it's a unique once-only number that you would give to the browser. So it would have handed that number back. It would be verified that that was a unique number, and you would never get this kind of clash. But that's what we did. And we did that incident plan. We fixed it within hours. We then analyzed all our data and had 6 sessions that had been affected in the period that that singleton had been placed in there by accident, realistically. 5 million logins, 6 people managed to share access tokens. When we looked at those 6 people, none of them had downloaded stuff from the place they accidentally ended up. We suspect that what happened was people went in, because they're normal users who have a real job, not a BBC reporter. They looked in, went, that's odd, because that's not my folders. Now I'll close the browser, log out, log back in. Oh, now I'm seeing the right stuff, and they didn't tell us. Right, because why would they? Because they just saw a glitch in a computer system. It's not their day job. They just want to get into the files they're working on, you know. So we actually then reached out to all the customers we had, including ones who hadn't been affected, and told them exactly what had happened, how we fixed it, how we made sure it wasn't their documents that were included. And it was really cool, because we had people like the Home Office, Government Home Office, really congratulating us on releasing the level of detail, being really honest about it. When we were discussing whether we should do this, Ian Cooper was on the side of, we need to be honest, we need to say exactly what happened, we need to talk about all this. Even about a third of the development team, the engineers, said we should not tell anyone how it happened. They didn't want to tell people, never mind the commercial side. So it was a real tussle to get that out, and virtually everyone senior in engineering was like, no, we admit to this, and we say exactly what happened and how we fixed it, because that's the way we get confidence back. So, and as an example of how not to do this is, anyone remember that Okta got hacked, right, recently? So, and their first response was, yes, we got hacked, it was a development system, it never affected our live systems. And they stuck to that for about 4 days before they finally admitted, no, it was on our live systems and it did hack real things. And the trust that they lost at that point was horrific. because their job was to be a secure method of login, and they lied about how they got hacked. Because the instinct was to go, no, it didn't affect real people. So it's better to be honest about that. At free market, so saying we haven't had a big one, we've had little ones. Sql Azure, so we had a server outage. We use platform as a service in Azure. We use something called Sql Azure Databases. If you don't know about them, you kind of rent a database with so much CPU and so much disk space. You kind of get it on a SQL server with a name, but it's a virtual SQL server. It doesn't really exist as a kind of item of hardware. You know that because some of your databases go down at one point and the other databases don't, yet they're on the same SQL server. That's because they aren't on the same piece of physical hardware, and someone has run something, hopefully not us, that caused it to blue screen, right? And was knocking out that hardware. So regional failovers solve this. We could just flip it over to Amsterdam. It's on a different bit of hardware. If it's not us, we won't be affected because we're not taking that box out. And it turned out we weren't taking the box out because it worked fine. When I was looking all this up about reliability, one of the things that's in the Microsoft documentation on SQL Azure is you should set up regional failover groups because you never know when there might be a server outage caused by, a memory failure or someone accidentally cutting a network cable while doing a hardware upgrade. And you're going, if they've written that in their documentation, then it happened, right? So that means somewhere in Azure data center, someone was moving hardware and cut through the wrong network cables and took out someone's server. So that genuinely must have happened. Otherwise, they wouldn't have written it because it makes no sense to have written that otherwise. So equally, we have a banking partner. So you have regional, so who's in the cloud? Who's got their systems in the cloud? Right, so you get availability zones. So normally you get a region, so UK South. It has availability zones, which normally means different buildings in a data center with different power supplies going to them, and they shouldn't both go down at the same time. And then you might have regional failovers, so you have sets of regions that are designed to be worked together. Specifically, they won't do rolling updates on both regions at the same time, so you've got a safer result. AWS do a similar kind of practice. Everyone goes, availability zones will be enough. Not for UK South, it went down for 8.5 hours. One of our third-party suppliers said, we're really regional, resilient, apart from this one service which you only deployed to UK South and it was unavailable for 8 hours. You weren't affected, but you should be aware that you could have been affected, and it did affect some of our customers. And then the other thing, which I consider an incident, and it was odd because initially no one thought it was an incident, Slack went down in February for about 2 hours. The interesting thing about Slack going down for us is we use it with customers. So we invite customers into private channels in Slack where they can see how their payments are going through our system. We also use it to report error messages. So if we've got problems at the back end, we actually use Slack rather than just saturating emails into developers' inboxes. We also do do live publishing of all our currency limits and what our daily limits are on various banks so that we can see if we're approaching the limits of what we're allowed to trade in a day because we do foreign currency conversions. So if Slack goes down, it affects our customers and our work internally. And more importantly, in the middle of the incident document is, you should report an incident using Slack. Everything should be in Slack. And then there's a big bit that says, if Slack is unavailable, we will use Teams. We'll work out how we're using it at the time, right? Because frankly, it's not likely, but we'll end up with an incident management channel in Teams and run it like that. I checked that these slides, I ran through these slides on Tuesday morning and was going, I'll just check that they're all up to date. Not up to date enough, because Cloudflare went down again this Tuesday. And that was an hour and a quarter. It went missing and took out whole chunks of the internet with it. So it's not your kit, it's not your cloud provider's kit, it's now some random other bloody bit of the internet can take you out as well. So they disappeared, and that was, So that was 25 minutes. It was an hour and a quarter this week that it went missing. So that was quite bad. And then you get the UK South. Apparently, what happened was they had a failure of their cooling systems that could cool the buildings. They didn't want everything to go too hot and break, so they just started shutting everything down automatically. You know, the systems kick in and it just starts closing all the boxes down to cool it. And that's why they were down for 8 hours, because then they have to get that cooling system back up and running, get the temperatures back to normal, and then bring everything in gradually, because while you can turn everything off quickly, turning things on is quite slow. Because if you turn everything on at the same time, and I used to work in a TV company like this, where if you flicked every switch on this switchboard, they'd all click back down, because as the monitors came on in a studio, they take so much power, you can only do one switch, wait 5 seconds, do the next one, and gradually switch the whole bank on. So yeah, so they lost that for 8 hours. Is anyone in AWS? Yeah, and if I said US East 1, I Googled it just to check, but as soon as I read about US East 1, I went, oh, that'll be North Virginia then, because that's the one that always goes down, like, genuinely. And someone said, how come that's the one that's always goes down? I guess because it's the first one they built, and it's crap. Right? It's also got the most stuff in it, right? So, yeah, Huddle had stuff in AWS, in US East, regularly. It's just awful. And it is quite common that goes down. You know, that was December. And the interesting bit about this is, and this is why I would advise anyone who does a regional failover strategy and says, what will happen is, we'll be mostly in this region, and we'll have a little backup region, and if we have a problem, we'll fail over to that backup region, and we'll scale our system up. My advice is, don't do that. What you want is the same, you want to run live if you can. So get your software architecture to run live and run about the same power in both regions. And the reason you do that is when US East 1 had problems, people tried to move to every other region in the US, and you couldn't scale anything up because everyone else was busy reserving all the scale-up capacity of all the other regions. So don't think that you'll get away with this in the cloud by scaling up your other region when it goes down, because everyone else will be doing that and there will be no availability whatsoever at that point. So you need it pretty level. Oh, and I was going to say, I was doing an interview for SSW TV, and they were talking about weirdest incidents that I've ever had. So I said I worked for TV companies. So I used to work for a breakfast TV company in the UK called GMTV, and we put in our first newsroom system in the UK that was based on kind of PC servers. And they were 2 servers connected by a bit of fiber, and it used something called Novell Network, which you have to be a certain age with grey hairs to know about, right? And in the front of this manual, which is a tiny manual, it said, please do not put your servers in the same physical location. Because clearly, the whole point of this was to have them separate. And we were worried about it because we had water leaking near our servers, and we finally went, we ought to move these out of the way. But we actually only did that after a Greek television company who equally had the same newsroom system. This is why we heard about it. They lost both their servers that were physically located. When a rocket-propelled grenade came through the window, went through both servers, didn't explode, and went out the window on the other side of the building and fell on the floor on the other side. So they were lucky it didn't blow up, but it did take out both servers, because that's what it went through on the path through the office. Because they didn't have a data center, neither did we at GMTV. The servers were just downstairs, you know, near the control room. So things like that happen, not very often, but are really weird. And that's why I say in your plans, you won't have every eventuality. You won't have rocket-propelled grenades will go through my office and take out both servers. However, you did get a manual telling you not to put them in the same place, so it really is your fault if you put them next to each other. It's really tempting to put them next to each other because that's where your uninterruptible power supplies are and all your facilities, and it's in a locked room and all sorts of reasons why you would. So my takeaways from incident management in all my years of having to handle these things are, have a plan. And that's it. That plan is something you practice, that you work with, You've got all the communication ready to go out to third parties and to customers. You've got all the contact details in there. No one needs to worry about what people's phone numbers are. There was only 2 people out of the main team at Free Market who hadn't got their mobile phone numbers in Slack, and I just had to ping them, and they just added them to it. They didn't even object because they know what it's about. You know, they're paid enough that they can have their phone numbers in there. No one's going to use them for a giggle, a joke. And get that comprehensive record of events, because not only might you need to pass them on to a regulator and do it for auditing purposes, it allows you to do a kind of retro, or if you're a developer, or a post-mortem, if you're probably a business person, on what happened in the incident, how you could do it better next time, and just improve on the process, you know. And be as open and honest as possible, because I think your customers will appreciate it. Everyone in the company appreciates it more. If everyone can report an incident, be honest about what happened, and you'll fix things in a way that you will never do if you kind of hide things and try and punish people for opening the wrong link or deleting an accidentally dropping a table or something like that out of the database. You're better off having the plan and the strategy for coping with it and get people to tell you about it as soon as possible. Okay, I've ended massively early. I must have talked really fast.
It's good to do that before lunch.
So I'm sorry, oh yes. So has anyone got any questions, remembering that you get a free book if you ask a question, which I'm not going to throw at someone because I'll go and hit them and it'll hurt. And if no one asks enough questions, come up and collect a free book anyway. And at least leave with a nice little bit of swag. Any questions? Oh,
just one. So,
oh, there's a microphone. Yeah, it's really handy. And a book.
So for smaller companies or say startups, what does the incident response team look like?
The incident response team, because we're a startup, so we only, whoops, get on camera. So what does the incident response team look like on our startup? So we've only got like 50 people, and until recently we only had like 6, 7 people in the engineering team. So the incident team looks like the head of engineering and the CTO, one of them. We would also have the chief risk officer, so the head of compliance, because for us, they're the ones who are going to have to work out whether it was major, minor, or not really an incident at the level of detail that the regulator will want to have returned, and then probably someone from the commercial or marketing team as well. So we'd have 3 or 4 people who are making the decisions. We would also rope in banking operations if we thought it was getting really serious. So when we do a database failover, we can make that decision on talking to banking ops, the operations team who handle payments, chatting to the banks, also 1 person in engineering and 1 person in commercial. If we do a full regional failover, so we're going to move everything from Dublin over to Amsterdam and just run off 1 center, which is what you would do if we were going to lose an entire region, then there's more planning on that. So you're probably looking at, right, we have to adjust our front door policies, which is how we gateway all our calls into our system. We have to move all the traffic just to 1 data center. So at that point, there's more planning, and we give the leadership team the decision that we're going to go to 1 region only and go, Azure is having enough problems in Dublin that we're going to Amsterdam only, or enough problems in Amsterdam that we're going to Dublin only. And you need to make that shout, whether we wait or we go to that, and then we'll do the work afterwards. So at that point, there's more people involved in the decision because the decision to move an entire region is more problematic. So if we went completely to Amsterdam, we have less redundancy on our contacts with banks. So in Dublin, we have more redundant connections into our financial service providers, whereas we only have single connections in Amsterdam. So it's all a risk analysis. And to be honest, at that point, you want to hand that to the management team and go, what do you think the risk is? If it's 7 at night, you might not do it, and might see if Azure comes back. If it's going to be 10 in the morning and it's affecting customers badly enough, because that's the point at which people are really trying to put money through the system, you might move it over a bit easier and make that decision quicker. But yeah, it's get the people in the room. If it's not affecting banking operations, there's no need for them to be there. Don't add them to the conversation for no reason. So is my advice. Yeah. Any other questions? Yep. Oh. And then I'll go to you at the back.
Can you tell me what a rehearsal looks like? Is that a multi-hour event, a half-day event?
Yeah. Yeah. So rehearsal, normally it's done as a paper kind of exercise more than anything. Normally you don't try and mimic every system being down by actually turning every system off, because that would be unpleasant. But it'd be about half a day. So you'd warn everyone you were going to do it, because there's no reason. Some people might go, oh, we'll spring it on an incident as if it's like live and we won't tell anyone about it. But that doesn't work because people have meetings that are quite important. So you give them warning because what you want them to do is run through it as an exercise. So it's to make them go through the plan, do it on paper, say we would have sent emails out at this point, we would have dealt with this, we would have checked with these, and just make sure everyone knows how they would have talked to each other during that time. And you would probably make it half a day. And have it so that if it was the afternoon, you'd start it as if something started at 1, and you'd go through, and you'd have it planned out that actually the tech team take an hour to resolve this. And then have someone pretend to be a customer trying to find out information about it and what you're going to tell them while the tech team is still working on it. And how are you talking to the tech team? Well, you only talk through the engineering manager. So we can run the Slack channel up with a big warning on it going, this is a rehearsal. And make sure that no one thinks it's a real thing and goes and talks to the wrong people. I say that from working at Sky TV, where they did a rehearsal of the Queen Mum dying. And some Australian went and saw it, who worked at Sky, thought it was real, told their mum, and it ended up in the Australian papers that she died, and it hadn't. She hadn't. So you've got to be careful about how you rehearse. So as long as you make it clear it's a rehearsal, you're okay. But I would allocate half a day to it, mainly because you start the incident, you pretend it's taking time to fix, you emulate how you would talk to customers that it's resolved, and then give it an hour at the end of the day for how did that happen, what didn't work, and you adjust how the incident plan goes in order to accommodate the changes that you think are necessary. So the first time we did incident management from Slack, you hit the plus, you reported it, it just put it in the incident management channel. And I said to someone, yeah, so you then go to the incident management channel, and they just went, oh, well, what's that? Because they haven't got that in their Slack automatically, because it's available, but you always need to add the channels you're interested in. So that's why now, in the general channel, it goes, Liam's just reported this, you can follow it in #incident management, and everyone can just click on it, go to the channel, add it. So that was just the first incident we went, oh, I really should put something in the general channel to funnel everyone off to the separate place. Because then they're not chatting about the incident in the general channel, they're only chatting about over there in the other channel. So yeah, half a day I'd say for rehearsal. Ooh, question at the back? I'll reserve a book for you.
What are your thoughts on doing like a real DR as like a practice or rehearsal? So for context, we're in a regulated industry. We have to prove to regulators each year that we can do that. Yeah, I guess, what are your thoughts on actually doing it for real?
We do it every 6 months because we're in a regulated industry.
Yeah, every 12 months.
So we reserve a Saturday. We inform all our customers that we're going to do a DR test.
Do you actually do a real DR, or do you just do a practice sort of DR? Where production still runs fine?
Oh no, we move everything from one region to another and switch everything off in the region that we've come from and check that everything's switched off and that everything gets processed in the other region. The only limits we have to that are, you do it at the weekend, you can't test some of the banking links because guess what? They're not live when it isn't a business day, and certain foreign currencies aren't tradable on a Saturday night or a Sunday morning. So little bits like that we'll always test during the week and do tests on those individual components that those connections to third parties work. But the main DR is every 6 months it's our job to do DR. Just like every 6 months it's our job to get pen tested and do a report on that. So it just becomes part of the everyday thing. The really nice bit is if you run live and you're releasing to both all the time, your DR is pretty easy because you're already running everything. It should just work. And the only thing you're doing is saying, you're now the leader, and you're the one talking to the banks, and you're now the follower or whatever, or you're switched off completely. So that's the only finessing that you have to do, is otherwise everything was running anyway. So all your APIs, all your websites were running from either of them. And it makes it easy when you do platform as a service in the cloud. So the Azure databases with failover groups, when you say failover, switching your Azure database from Dublin to Amsterdam is about 20 seconds for it to clear down its logs, move everyone over, and then hopefully you all have retry policies in your database code, because the first time any bit of code hits the database, it will fail the first time, and then the second time it will pick up the new DNS entry and go to the right server, and it'll just work. So database stuff is a cinch to practice. You can practice that during live hours, frankly. You wouldn't have a problem doing it live during the day with real customers because it wouldn't bother you. Moving the whole lot, that's much more serious. Equally, we have third parties that we talk to, banks, and guys who connect to Swift network, and they do DR where they'll tell you, by the way, on this weekend, you'll be connecting to a different service for a day, and then we'll flip it back. So they run it for an entire day and things like that. We're chickens, we only run it for about an hour and then push it back so that we can all go and have tea. So, because we're normally doing it late afternoon on a Saturday, make sure it all works, make sure all the log files are right, make sure there's no errors, and then push it all back to normal, and then go and have our tea and watch telly with the kids. So, but yeah. But it's good to do it regularly every 6 months, I have to say. Any more questions? Ooh, go for that.
So since we had the incident with Slack going down, have you started doing rehearsals over Teams as well occasionally to cover that scenario?
No, we've just basically said we'll use Teams when we need to do it. We've got Teams. We use Teams for meetings all the time. So we're already using Teams for meetings. Do we use it for chat? Not a lot. It's interesting. Every now and then you get a new employee, not engineering, but one of the kind of banking guys who's used Teams at a bank and tries to use it to chat to people. And most people go, can you just use Slack, please? Because the problem is Slack has reply threads that are much easier. So frankly, it's easier to use Slack. And a bit more flexible on use on devices as well, which makes it a bit easier. So we haven't fully tested the Teams thing, it has to be said. What we do need to do, what it did highlight was the fact that all the stuff that reports to Slack, not for customers, but for our internal use, we've now got tickets to get it to go to Teams channels as well. So that at least if Slack goes down, all the stuff we would have dumped into Slack is now going to go to Teams, and we can always go to Teams to find out the same information we would have got from Slack. But in the 2.5 years that I've been with Free Market and a 1.5 years of using it at Huddle before, that's the first time it had gone down for any length of time. So the really nice thing about using cloud provision rather than your own data center and things like Cloudflare and stuff, is that when things go down nowadays, it's not just you, it's a whole chunk of stuff that your customers probably got, and they're more tolerant of you going down because they've lost much more important stuff half the time than your software. And they know everyone's having the same problem. Whereas when you used to own everything in a data center and somehow it was only your kit that had gone, you were in it was much harder to defend when something like Rackspace. So Huddle was in Rackspace, and we happened to be on a network switch with another customer who got DDoSed. So all of our traffic got hammered because we were on the same network switch as someone else, and it took them around 2 hours to get the DDoS protection put on it. But the really nice thing is now platform as a service, we're using Front Door for our traffic, and the answer of DDoS is Azure Front Door has DDoS protection all over it because it's used for everything. On the flip side of that, incidents recently in Azure is Front Door in West Europe having network issues, which has happened twice in the last month, where we actually use a Palo Alto firewall that's software-based, that's in Azure to do our VPN with a VPN client, so that all our machines are connected via VPN. Gives us a nice static IP address for firewalls and stuff like that for use with third-party software and also for accessing stuff in Azure. The combination of that firewall being in Azure and the problems with front door actually meant that we had to turn off our VPN clients and able to get into our own website at one point, which trying to get Azure to admit they've got a root cause problem is really hard at that point. And they actually claimed there was no networking issues in Azure. And we had to go to them and say, your own availability checker on our website that's in Azure had problems from West Europe, but not from everywhere else in the world. You really did have network problems. Go and find out why it happened and why it's happened twice. But at that point, yeah, the front door gives us so much better DDoS protection than anything else. And if you ever had to pay for real DDoS protection like Cloudflare or something like that, that was really expensive. Like really expensive to have that put in, and it's much cheaper to do it in Azure now. So it sounds like I work for Microsoft by now. It's just nice that something I can buy off the shelf, which seems expensive, has a load of stuff built in that makes it much cheaper than the other solutions you used to have in the past. So yeah, but we ought to use Teams at some point. But just getting everyone to use Teams, it's hard enough to get them to do it for meetings at times. But yeah. Any more questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much.